Hey there, I'm Mike Rugnetta. This is Crash Course Theater, and today we're exploring the Harlem Renaissance. This 1920s movement, centered in an uptown Manhattan neighborhood, encouraged a dynamic reawakening and reimagining of art, music, and literature. It was a very necessary corrective to all of those decades of melodramas, minstrelsy, and blackface. And unlike the other Renaissance, there was no bubonic plague. The Harlem Renaissance roughly spanned the 1920s, spreading out from Harlem and across America's Northeast. Writer James Weldon Johnson wrote about the Harlem of that era, not merely a colony or a community or a settlement, but a black city located in the heart of white Manhattan and containing more Negroes to the square mile than any other spot on Earth. It strikes the uninformed observer as a phenomenon. A miracle. First characterized by the writer Alain Locke as the new Negro movement, the Harlem Renaissance was by and for people who had arrived from the South during the Great Migration, and others who had arrived in the United States via the Caribbean diaspora. The movement invited African-American artists to practice forms of art that would shatter stereotypes, increase visibility, and uplift Black Americans. Much of the work was celebratory, but artists didn't shy away from difficult themes. Alienation, discrimination, and the discomfort of performing Black identity in a white world were all explored. This is an example of the phenomenon that theorist and activist W.E.B. Du Bois described as double consciousness, the feeling of being Black and American at the same time, of seeing yourself as simultaneously part of and not part of society. In terms of form and genre, some artists of the period looked back to distinctly African and African-American folk forms, like fables and spirituals, while others looked to newer forms, like the fractured modernism of Jean Toomer's Cane, or the jazz-echoing rhythms of poems by Langston Hughes and Geraldine Brooks. The Harlem Renaissance was pretty much the moment when the white world, and also a lot of the Black world, began to celebrate Black artists. This doesn't mean that Black artists were new to America, far from it, but many of them hadn't been known or honored outside of their communities. In the 1920s, theaters in New York were still largely segregated. Blacks and whites typically sat in different sections, and I'm sad to report that blackface was still a thing. In 1903, there had been a Broadway musical comedy, In Dahomey, written by and starring African Americans, as well as several other Broadway-adjacent musicals by Black composers. Though, like In Dahomey, these relied pretty heavily on stereotype. In terms of serious, non-musical plays, the white playwright Ridgely Torrance created a sensation with 3 plays for a Negro theater, crafting realistic portrayals of Black life. These plays were originally performed by white actors, but in 1917, an all-Black cast, directed by Robert Edmond Jones, led the Broadway production. This was a Broadway first. 3 Negro plays played by Negroes was the headline in the New York Times. The critic said that the interesting and sympathetic plays were inadequately acted. In the same year, one of Manhattan's little theaters, the Neighborhood Playhouse, hosted Rachel, a play written by a Black playwright, Angelina Grimke, and staged with an all-Black cast. Rachel is the story of a young African-American woman so shaken by the racism she discovers all around her that she vows to never have children. In 1926, Du Bois published an influential manifesto in the crisis, establishing what African-American theater should be. 1. About us. That is, they must have plots which reveal Negro life as it is. 2. By us. That is, they must be written by Negro authors who understand from birth and continued association just what it means to be a Negro today. 3. For us. That is, the theater must cater primarily to Negro audiences and be supported and sustained by their entertainment and approval. 4. Near us. The theater must be in a Negro neighborhood near the mass of ordinary Negro people. While a lot of the innovation was happening in the little theaters, African-American works were making it to Broadway too. In 1921, the team of Noble Sissle and U.B. Blake introduced Shuffle Along, a wildly successful jazz musical that featured Josephine Baker and Paul Robeson in small roles. Langston Hughes called it a honey of a show, swift, bright, funny, rollicking, and gay, with a dozen danceable, singable tunes. Everybody was in the audience, including me. Shuffle Along set off a minor craze for African-American shows, and 9 more made it to Broadway in the next 3 years.